As Canberrans celebrate the bicentenary of the naming of their city, let's take a look back at the past century. I'm Siobhan Heanue and this is the news for March 12, 2113. The Canberra Centre's last retail outlet closed today after being open for more than a century. The information economy has completely restructured the urban landscape. Canberra is now a coalition of 6 towns based on the once parodied Y plan. 100 years ago, wealthy retirees from the baby boomer generation lived in Civic. But today, it's 3rd and 4th generation Canberra students and young professionals who live in the city's high-rise apartments. Back in 2013, people feared that the suburban way of life was under threat by plans for urban consolidation. But within a decade, the city-state and federal governments had released the land around the urban lakes for residential development. Generation Y abandoned the suburbs and converged on the lake shores and town centres. This produced a powerful sense of connection to place as people rediscovered the benefits of community living. The suburbs, as we once knew them, became extinct. Katie Gallagher, the then Chief Minister of the ACT, which is now known as the Republic of Australia Capital City State, held a referendum in 2020 to decentralise the government and establish local councils in the town centres. The referendum was overwhelmingly successful, and the towns of Gungahlin, Belconnen, Civic, Woden, Molonglo and Tuggeranong became semi-autonomous and self-governing. Each town council was established on the condition that it agreed to the city's metropolitan plan stipulation that the towns of Canberra should be world-class examples of urbanism in the Federal Republic of Australia. The plan is still managed by the Federal Republic's Department of National Significance and Civic Leadership, and it detailed how cities could meet the Federation's ambitious zero carbon emissions targets by 2110. In the early 21st century, urbanists argued that cities could support the creation rather than the consumption of essential energy, food and fresh water. This model became the blueprint for a new governance structure. All levels of government came on board, committing to zero carbon emissions for cities. By 2023, the housing affordability crisis had become intergenerational. For the first time in 80 years, home ownership dropped below 50% in the city-state of Canberra. Within 10 years of Canberra's centenary, the land sale-driven economy had completely collapsed. The government bought up abandoned offices and shopping malls and converted them into home and office campuses. That meant that the government could recapture the kind of development profits that it had long ago relinquished to the greenfield developers. Architects began lobbying the government to refocus on the once parodied notion of decentralisation. The Australian Alliance of Architects partnered with the government and the community to reoccupy the town centres. The Federal Greens Labor coalition of 2026 trialled a 100% telecommuting government department in a bid to improve worker productivity. It was the government's response to the ambitious benchmarks of the new Employment Wellbeing Index. Defunct shopping malls were converted to public sector campuses where employees worked in a virtual office, connected to their colleagues by cloud technology that was made available by the National Broadband Network. Today, over 80% of citizens live less than a 20-minute walk away from their workplace. And with fuel costing around $500 a litre, less than 5% of the workforce drive private vehicles to work. By 2020, the new carbon economy had turned the low-density suburb from a liability into an asset for the city-state. The garden suburbs, combined with the National Capital Open Space System, became valuable biodiversity banks in the carbon economy. The Republic signed an international biodiversity agreement to protect the world's last remaining biodiversity hotspots. Today, biodiversity banking underwrites Canberra's budget. The depopulation of the garden suburbs went into overdrive in 2030. The city-state government undertook to buy back suburban homes, and a few entrepreneurial citizens reoccupied the land to capture its biodiversity benefits. They used the land to supply the city's energy and fresh food. Today, suburbs that were once the bedrock of Australian society are now park-like estates. By 2063, walkable towns had finally become a reality, and only the wealthiest citizens live in car-dependent suburban estates today. These estates look like a hybrid between wind farms, market gardens and 18th century picturesque English estates. Paddy Pentoni, the grandson of a former landscape architect and founder of the Epic Farmers Market, now owns what was once known as the suburb of Heanue. He became the first of a new breed of biodiversity and food entrepreneurs. Today, his estate not only produces food and biodiversity credits for the city-state, it also provides nearly 10% of the town of Belconnen's energy supply through solar, wind, thermal and sewerage power. Today, over 50 biodiversity billionaires just like Paddy are feeding and fuelling the 6 towns of the city-state by providing 3/4 of all their food and energy needs. Some of the biodiversity estates were more successful than others, and many of the residents who opted to stay in the suburbs became increasingly isolated by the absence of services. That's because the city infrastructure was concentrated around the towns. Some communes formed, and through either choice or necessity, these people lived a largely subsistence life. In a strange twist of fate, what used to be the suburbs now house both the wealthiest and the poorest citizens of Canberra. In the face of ongoing budget cuts, the cultural institutions partnered with the biodiversity billionaires to build the Melbourne, Canberra, Sydney, Brisbane ultra-high-speed solar rail network. This made the parliamentary zone a major national convention and education hub. Aeroplane flights have all but disappeared, and telecommuting has extended into the education sector. Students, businesses and public servants all use rail services when they need to meet face-to-face or to attend intensive learning studios. Higher education has been replaced by lifelong education. In 2115, a World Economic Congress will meet in Canberra's internationally famous conference park, the Democracy Triangle, to discuss the state of the new global producer economy, where carbon has replaced cash as the monetary standard. The financial and government institutions of the major coastal cities have abandoned their central business districts because of sea level rise. The cost of rebuilding infrastructure, as well as the impossible problems of congestion, led the major coastal cities to embrace virtual CBDs instead. This has all allowed Canberra to become the place to be for traditional face-to-face meetings for the companies that have shifted to the telecommuter business model. Meanwhile, the manufacturing sector has taken over Brindabella Park to create a 24-hour mixed residential and manufacturing precinct along the eastern boundary of the city. In recent months, it's even made moves to create the first new town in Canberra in 50 years. Today, the planning authorities follow live metropolitan plans, where Canberra's future is rewritten daily by the changing events of the global economy. And more Australian citizens than ever before are contributing to these metropolitan plans by communicating through the blogosphere. I'm Siobhan Heanue, reporting from Canberra on the occasion of the city-state's bicentenary.